Every dollar in your wallet costs more to make than you think, and the truth might make you question everything about money. Right now, there are $54 billion bills circulating in America, 54 billion pieces of paper that we trust more than gold, more than stocks, more than almost anything else in our lives. But here's what nobody tells you. It costs 7.5 cents to produce a single $1 bill. That might not sound like much until you realize the government printed $2.8 billion bills last year alone. That's over $200 million just to make money that's worth $2.8 billion. Wait, what? We're spending money to make money, and the numbers get even stranger when you look at higher denominations. A $100 bill, that costs 17 cents to make, so the government spends 17 cents to create something worth $100. That's a 58,700% return on investment. Not bad, right? But here's where it gets controversial. Is this the biggest scam in history, or the most brilliant system ever created? Some people call it a con, others call it genius. By the end of this video, you'll understand why both sides have a point, and you'll never look at a dollar bill the same way again. This is where your money is born, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, 2 facilities, one in Washington, D.C., one in Fort Worth, Texas. Both are surrounded by more security than most military bases. And for good reason. These buildings produce 38 million bills every single day. That's about 490 bills per second. In the time it takes you to watch this video, they'll print roughly $20 million. But here's what makes this place different from any other factory on Earth. They're not making a product, they're making trust. Because the moment people stop believing in the value of these paper rectangles, the entire system collapses. That's happened before in history: Germany in the 1920s, Zimbabwe in the 2000s, Venezuela right now. When money loses its meaning, society falls apart. So the real question isn't, how much does it cost to make a dollar? The question is, how much does it cost to make a dollar that people believe in? And the answer, way more than 7.5 cents. Let's start with the paper, except it's not paper. Pick up a dollar bill right now, feel it, crumple it, try to tear it. Regular paper would disintegrate after a few days in your pocket. It would turn to mush in the washing machine. It would rip the first time you folded it. Dollar bills are made from 75% cotton and 25% linen. The same stuff your expensive bed sheets are made from, but woven so tightly that it can survive being folded 4,000 times before it breaks. Think about that, 4,000 folds. The average dollar bill lasts 6.6 years in circulation. It goes through thousands of hands, gets stuffed in wallets, shoved in pockets, dropped on the ground, spilled on, sat on, and occasionally even laundered. And it survives. This special paper is produced by a single company, Crane Currency. They've had the contract since 1879. That's almost 150 years of producing paper that feels like cloth. And they only make it for the US government. You can't buy this paper. You can't order it online. If you somehow got your hands on blank currency paper, you'd be arrested before you made it home. The paper alone costs about 2.5 cents per bill, but that's just the beginning. Now let's talk about the ink. You know why dollars are green. Most people think it's traditional or aesthetic. The truth is way more practical. In the 1860s, when the government first started printing paper money, photography was becoming popular, and photographs were black and white. Counterfeiters could photograph real bills and print copies, so the Bureau chose green ink because it photographed poorly. It was the anti-counterfeiting measure of its time. Today, the ink is far more sophisticated. There are actually several different types of ink on every bill, and some of them you can't even see. There's color-shifting ink. Hold a $10 bill at an angle and watch the number in the bottom right corner change from copper to green. That ink costs about 50 times more than regular ink. There's magnetic ink. Currency counting machines use magnets to detect it. That's how banks can tell if a bill is real just by running it through a machine. And then there's invisible ink, ultraviolet ink that only shows up under black light. Every real bill has these hidden security strips with text you can only read under UV light. The ink on a single bill costs about 1.5 cents, but here's the really expensive part. The formulas are classified. The exact composition of these inks is a federal secret. Because if counterfeiters knew exactly what was in the ink, they could replicate it. Now we get to the actual printing, and this is where things get insane. Your home printer shoots tiny drops of ink onto paper. Fast, cheap, easy. Currency doesn't work that way. Every single dollar bill is printed using a process called intaglio printing. It's a technique that dates back to the Renaissance. First, an engraver, an actual human artist, hand carves the design into a steel plate. This isn't done with computers or lasers. It's done with a tool called a burin. One mistake, and they start over. These master engravers spend years learning their craft. There are only a handful of them in the entire country. They're the only people on Earth who know how to create the exact lines, curves, and patterns that make up our currency. And they carve everything backwards, because when the plate presses into the paper, the image reverses. Once the plate is ready, it gets covered in ink. Then a machine wipes away the excess, leaving ink only in the grooves. The paper is pressed against the plate with 20 tons of pressure. 20 tons! That's why you can feel the texture when you run your finger across a bill. The ink isn't sitting on top of the paper, it's pressed into it. This is almost impossible to fake. Counterfeiters use regular printers that lay ink on top of paper. Under a magnifying glass, you can see the difference immediately. But intaglio printing is slow and expensive. Each sheet has to be individually pressed. There's no mass production shortcut. The process actually uses 3 different printing methods. First, offset printing for the background colors and some detailed images. Second, intaglio for the portraits and main text. Third, letterpress for the serial numbers. Each sheet of currency goes through these 3 processes in massive machines that cost tens of millions of dollars each. The Bureau has 23 of these machines running constantly. The printing process itself adds about 2 cents to the cost of each bill. And here's something crazy. After all that work, about 10% of bills are rejected during quality control. Misprints, ink smudges, misaligned designs, they all get shredded. So really, the government has to print 110 bills to get 100 good ones. That rejection rate is built into the cost. But we are still not at the real cost, not even close. Think about everything we haven't counted yet. Security. The Bureau employs thousands of guards, has hundreds of cameras, motion sensors, biometric locks, and more. Every single person who works there goes through extensive background checks, random drug tests, polygraph examinations. The security budget alone runs into hundreds of millions of dollars per year. Storage. Before bills are released into circulation, they're stored in climate-controlled vaults. The temperature and humidity have to be perfect or the paper degrades. These vaults cost millions to maintain. Transportation. Once printed, bills are shipped to Federal Reserve banks across the country in armored trucks with armed guards. The logistics of moving billions of bills safely costs more than the printing itself. Destruction. When bills get too worn out, banks send them back to be shredded. The government has to pay for that too. Last year, the Federal Reserve destroyed 7.5 billion bills. That's 7.5 billion bills that cost money to produce, circulated for a few years, and then had to be destroyed and replaced. Research and development. The Bureau constantly develops new security features to stay ahead of counterfeiters. That $100 bill in your wallet, it took 15 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to design. When you add it all up, paper, ink, printing, security, storage, transportation, destruction, and R&D. The true cost of producing currency is about $1.2 billion per year. But wait, the Bureau produces about 38 million bills per day. That's roughly 14 billion bills per year. So the real cost per bill, about 8.6 cents when you factor in all these hidden costs. Here's where it gets interesting. $1 bill costs 7.5 cents, lasts 6.6 years. $5 bill costs 13.2 cents, lasts 4.7 years. $10 bill costs 13.2 cents, lasts 5.3 years. $20 bill costs 13.5 cents, lasts 7.8 years. $50 bill costs 15.5 cents, lasts 12.2 years. $100 bill costs 17 cents, lasts 22.9 years. See the pattern? Higher denomination bills cost more to produce, but they last way longer. A $100 bill survives almost 4 times as long as a $1 bill. Why? Because people handle them differently. You might get 10 transactions out of a $1 bill: coffee, vending machine, tip jar, but 100, people tend to save those, put them in wallets, use them sparingly. So let's look at the annual cost. $1 bill, 7.5 cents, 6.6 years equals 1.13 cents per year. $100 bill, 17 cents, 22.9 years equals 0.74 cents per year. The $100 bill is actually cheaper to maintain over time, even though it costs more upfront. This is why the government keeps trying to get people to use $2 bills and dollar coins. They last longer and save money in the long run. But people hate change, literally. Now here's where we get to the controversial part, the part that keeps economists up at night arguing with each other. Is producing physical currency even worth it anymore? Only 8% of all transactions in America are done with cash now. 8%. The rest, credit cards, debit cards, mobile payments, Venmo, PayPal, cryptocurrency. So why are we spending over $1 billion a year to produce something that 92% of transactions don't use? Sweden has almost completely eliminated cash. You can't even use coins on buses anymore. China is rapidly moving toward digital-only currency through systems like WeChat Pay and Alipay. Some economists argue that the US should do the same, go fully digital. Think about the savings. No more printing costs, no more transportation, no more destruction, no more counterfeiting to fight. And bonus, every transaction would be tracked, making tax evasion and money laundering nearly impossible. The government could save billions, banks could save billions, we'd eliminate theft of physical cash, we'd make illegal transactions much harder. Sounds perfect, right? Not so fast, because there's another side to this debate. 5% of American households don't have bank accounts. That's 7 million households. How do they pay for things without cash? Well, they should just get bank accounts, some people say. But here's why that's not simple. Opening a bank account requires ID, proof of address, sometimes a minimum deposit, and definitely a credit check. If you're homeless, undocumented, have bad credit, or live in a rural area without nearby banks, you're shut out of the system. Then there are immigrant communities who send money back home through cash systems. Elderly people who never learn to use digital payment. People who work for tips in cash-heavy industries. Going fully digital doesn't just eliminate paper money. It eliminates entire communities from the economy. But there's an even bigger issue: privacy. Cash is the last truly anonymous form of payment. When you hand someone a $20 bill, there's no record, no bank knows, no government agency knows, no tech company tracks it for advertising data. Digital payments, every single one is recorded somewhere. Every purchase you make, every place you shop, every transaction you complete, all tracked, stored, analyzed. And what happens when that system gets hacked? In 2017, Equifax lost the data of 147 million Americans. In 2013, Target's payment system was breached, affecting 41 million customers. In 2023, the Movite breach exposed data from hundreds of organizations. If we're 100% digital and the system crashes or gets hacked, how do you buy food? How do you get gas? How do you survive? Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Maria, the Texas power crisis, the California wildfires. When the power goes out, digital payment systems die, but cash still works. During Puerto Rico's hurricane crisis, people who had cash could buy supplies. People who only had cards were stuck. And here's the one nobody wants to talk about: government control. If all money is digital and tracked by the government, what stops them from freezing your accounts, from seeing every purchase you make, from controlling what you can and cannot buy? That could never happen here, some people say. But it already has. In 2022, the Canadian government froze bank accounts of people participating in trucker protests. No trial, no conviction, just frozen. Throughout history, the ability to make anonymous transactions has been crucial for everything from underground railroads to civil rights movements to supporting political dissidents. Cash is freedom, messy, expensive, inefficient freedom, but freedom nonetheless. So here's what's really happening, and it's way more complex than just paper costs money to make. The physical production cost of a dollar bill, that's 7.5 cents, that's not the real story. The real story is this: when the Bureau prints a dollar bill, the Federal Reserve buys it for face value. They pay $1 for something that costs 7.5 cents to make. That 92.5-cent difference, it goes back to the Treasury as profit. This is called seigniorage. It's how governments have made money since ancient Rome. Ancient kings would mint coins from gold and silver, but they'd mix in cheaper metals and pocket the difference. As long as people believed the coin was worth its face value, the king made a profit. We are doing the exact same thing today, just with paper instead of metal. Last year, the government made about $50 billion in seigniorage from producing currency and coins. $50 billion in pure profit from the difference between production cost and face value. That's a pretty good business model. But here's where economics gets weird. The reason a dollar bill has value is because there's a limited supply of them. Scarcity creates value. But the government can print more whenever they want. They just choose not to. Well, mostly not. In 2020 and 2021, during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve dramatically increased the money supply. They didn't physically print much more cash, but they created trillions of dollars digitally. The result: inflation. The money you had become worth less because there was more money in circulation. This is the fundamental tension with paper money. It only works if the government exercises restraint. If they print too much, it becomes worthless. Germany in 1923 printed so much money that people used it as wallpaper. It was literally cheaper than buying actual wallpaper. A loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Zimbabwe in 2008 printed a $100 trillion bill. 100 trillion, and I couldn't buy a bus ticket. Venezuela's currency became so worthless that people started weaving handbags out of it, not as art, as actual handbags, because the paper was worth more than the money printed on it. The US dollar has avoided this fate so far because of trust, global trust. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. Oil is priced in dollars. International trade happens in dollars. Countries stockpile dollars. As long as that trust exists, those 7.5-cent bills are worth $1. But trust is fragile. So what happens next? Here's what we know is coming. The Federal Reserve is actively developing a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. Think of it as a digital dollar officially backed by the US government but existing only as code. China has already launched their digital yuan. The European Central Bank is testing a digital euro. India has a digital rupee pilot program. The US is behind, but they're coming. The benefits: instant transactions, no physical production costs, complete tracking of illegal activity, perfect efficiency. The concerns: complete tracking of all activity, no privacy, no anonymity, total government oversight. Most experts predict we'll have a US CBDC within the next 10 years, but physical cash won't disappear, not completely. Here's why, even in Sweden, the cashless society, they're pulling back. After going almost completely digital, they realized the vulnerabilities. Now they're legally requiring banks to still handle cash. Because sometimes the old, expensive, inefficient way is the safer way. The likely future: a hybrid system, digital currency for most transactions, physical cash for emergencies, privacy, and communities that need it. We'll probably keep producing dollar bills for decades to come, but fewer of them. Maybe instead of 14 billion bills per year, we'll print 7 billion or 3 billion. The cost per bill might go up as production scales down, but the total cost will decrease. And here's something nobody's talking about: what happens to the design? Right now, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing employs master engravers who spend careers perfecting their craft. As demand for physical currency drops, will we lose that art form entirely? Will the dollar bills of 2050 be printed on demand with cheaper materials and simpler designs? Or will they become more elaborate, more artistic, precisely because they're rarer? Some countries are already treating physical currency as art. Switzerland's bills are gorgeous, with vertical designs and intricate details. They cost more to produce, but they're keeping the craft alive. Maybe that's where we're headed: physical currency as a backup system and an art form, something you collect, not just spend. So let's come back to our original question: what does it really cost to produce a dollar bill? We've talked about the 7.5 cents in materials and labor, the hidden costs that bring it closer to 8.6 cents, the infrastructure, security, and distribution that add billions to the annual budget. But we haven't talked about the real cost. The real cost of a dollar bill is trust. Every transaction you make with cash relies on both parties believing that this piece of cotton and linen has value, that it will still have value tomorrow, that other people will accept it. When that trust breaks, everything collapses. In 2008, banks stopped trusting each other, and the entire global financial system nearly imploded. The government had to pump trillions into the system just to keep it alive. Not because the money physically disappeared, but because trust disappeared. Those workers at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, they're not just making paper rectangles, they're manufacturing trust. Every security feature, every intricate line in the portrait, every color-shifting ink droplet, it's all there to say, this is real, you can trust this. And it works. Last year, only 1 in every 10,000 bills in circulation was counterfeit. That's a 0.01% counterfeit rate. Think about that. In a world where you can fake almost anything: IDs, passports, college degrees, even voices and faces with AI, the dollar bill remains one of the hardest things to counterfeit successfully. That's not luck. That's billions of dollars in anti-counterfeiting technology. That's 150 years of refinement. That's master craftsmen spending careers learning how to engrave plates by hand. The cost of producing physical currency is tiny compared to the cost of losing faith in currency. If people stopped trusting the dollar, the US economy would collapse overnight. Our $27 trillion GDP depends on everyone believing that these bills are worth something. And not just the US economy, the global economy, because the dollar isn't just America's currency, it's the world's currency. When other countries see that we spend $1.2 billion a year just to maintain the physical integrity of our cash, that sends a signal: we take this seriously, you can trust this. Compare that to cryptocurrency. Bitcoin has lost half its value multiple times. Entire crypto exchanges have collapsed overnight. FTX went from $32 billion in value to bankruptcy in days. Why no physical foundation, no government backing, just code and trust? And when the trust vanished, so did the value. The dollar isn't backed by gold anymore, hasn't been since 1971. But it's backed by something stronger, the full faith and credit of the United States government. And part of maintaining that faith is making currency that feels substantial, that looks impressive, that you can hold in your hand and think, this is real. Here's what nobody wants to admit. We're drifting toward a decision without actually making it. Cash usage drops every year. Digital payments increase every year. The infrastructure for physical currency gets more expensive to maintain as volume decreases. But we haven't decided as a society, do we want to keep physical money or not? Some people say the market will decide. If people stop using cash, it'll naturally phase out. But that's not how it works with currency, because currency is a public good. Its infrastructure, letting it slowly decay through neglect, is still a choice, just an unconscious one. And different communities have wildly different relationships with cash. In wealthy urban areas, you can go weeks without touching paper money. Everything's tap to pay, everything's contactless. But drive 2 hours into rural America and try to buy something with just your phone. Half the places won't take it. They want cash because card readers cost money and service fees eat into slim margins. Young people barely use cash. They Venmo each other, they tap their phones, they split bills on apps. But 70% of people over 65 still prefer cash for at least some transactions. They trust it more, they understand it better. It's what they've used their whole lives. So whose needs do we prioritize, and who gets to make that choice? In Sweden, they moved toward cashless so fast that there was backlash. Elderly people couldn't pay for bus tickets. Small businesses couldn't operate. The government had to backtrack and pass laws protecting cash access. In India, they tried to eliminate large bills overnight in 2016 to fight corruption. The result? Economic chaos. People couldn't buy food. Businesses couldn't pay workers. The economy contracted. Japan, on the other hand, is still heavily cash-based despite being one of the most technologically advanced countries on Earth. Why? Because they consciously decided to preserve it. Cash infrastructure is maintained. ATMs are everywhere. It's seen as a public service. America hasn't decided which path we're taking. We are just not thinking about it. And that's dangerous. Because by the time we realize we've lost cash infrastructure, it'll be too late to rebuild it. Those master engravers, they'll have retired. The specialized printing presses, they'll be decommissioned. The secure facilities, repurposed. You can't bring that back overnight if you suddenly need it. Think about it this way: how much is it worth to have a backup system? Home generators cost thousands of dollars. Most people will never need them. But when the power goes out, they're priceless. That's what physical currency is becoming, a backup system. Is it worth spending $1.2 billion a year to maintain a payment system that only handles 8% of transactions? Financial experts say no, it's inefficient, it's outdated, it's expensive. But emergency planners say yes, it's resilient, it's decentralized, it's independent of power grids and internet connections. It's the same debate we have about infrastructure everywhere. Why maintain these old bridges when we could build new ones cheaper? Because when the new bridge collapses, you need the old one. Why keep these landline phones when everyone has cell phones? Because when the cell tower goes down, landlines still work. So maybe the real question isn't, can we afford to keep producing physical currency? Maybe it's, can we afford not to? A major cyber attack takes down banking systems for a week. How do people buy food? A solar storm knocks out satellite communications. How do businesses operate? A conflict disrupts undersea internet cables. How does international trade continue? These aren't science fiction scenarios. They're on the Pentagon's risk assessment list. They're what cybersecurity experts worry about. They're why some preppers stockpile cash along with water and batteries. Physical currency is insurance, and like all insurance, it costs money and you hope you never need it. But when you need it, nothing else works. So that $1.2 billion per year, maybe it's not the cost of producing paper bills. Maybe it's the premium we pay for economic resilience. That's not how the government budgets for it, but maybe it's how we should think about it. Before we wrap this up, there are a few mind-blowing things about dollar bills that almost nobody knows. First, every single bill is unique, not just the serial number. The printing process creates microscopic variations in ink distribution, pressure patterns, and paper compression. No two bills are exactly identical. Forensic experts can identify individual bills from high-resolution scans. That's how they track ransom money and stolen bills. Each one has a unique fingerprint. Second, there are security features on bills that the government hasn't publicly acknowledged. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing admits that they build in secret features, that they never reveal features that only law enforcement and Treasury officials know about. Why? Because the moment they announce a security feature, counterfeiters start trying to replicate it. By keeping some features secret, they maintain an advantage. Think about that. There are things hidden in your dollar bill that you're not allowed to know about, and that's by design. Third, American bills are some of the plainest in the world, and that's intentional. Look at Canadian dollars. They're made of polymer plastic and have transparent windows. Australian dollars are practically works of art with holograms and color-changing elements. Swiss francs are vertical instead of horizontal. The US could make bills way more fancy. We have the technology, but we don't. Why? Because changing the design too much confuses people, especially elderly people and international users who rely on recognizing American bills quickly. The green color, the presidential portraits, the overall layout, it's all familiar, and familiarity builds trust. So we add security features gradually, a color-shifting ink here, a security thread there, but the core design stays recognizable. Fourth, banks don't decide when bills are too worn to use. The Federal Reserve has specific standards. A bill is considered unfit if it's limp, torn, or missing more than a small portion, excessively soiled, stained, or faded, damaged by heat, chemicals, or defaced by markings. But here's the catch. The average person isn't great at identifying unfit bills. Studies show that people will accept bills in terrible condition just because they're used to seeing worn money. That's why bank tellers are trained to pull damaged bills from circulation. They send them to the Federal Reserve, which shreds them and reports the serial numbers as destroyed. And what happens to shredded money? Some of it gets recycled into roofing, shingles, and insulation. Some get compressed into bricks and sold as souvenirs. You can literally buy a brick of shredded money for about $50. It's real currency that was destroyed, legal to own, illegal to reconstruct. Fifth, those serial numbers aren't random. They follow complex patterns that encode information about when and where the bill was printed, which series it belongs to, and its position in the printing run. There are also star notes, bills with a star after the serial number. These are replacement bills printed to take the place of defective ones. Collectors love them because they're rarer. Some serial numbers are worth way more than face value. Solid numbers like 88,888,888. Low numbers like 1. Fancy patterns like 12,345,678. People collect these like rare stamps. A $1 bill with serial number 1 sold for over $10,000. That's a 10,000% return on a piece of paper that costs 7.5 cents to make and has a face value of $1. The value of money isn't always in the number printed on it. Let's zoom out for a second, because this whole conversation raises a question that's bothered philosophers and economists for thousands of years. What is money, really? We started with barter. I'll trade you 3 chickens for that axe, direct exchange of goods. But barter doesn't scale. What if you need an axe but I don't want chickens? What if your chickens are sick? What if I need half an axe? So we created money. First, commodities that had inherent value: gold, silver, salt, shells, things that were universally desired, relatively rare and difficult to fake. Gold coins worked because gold itself was valuable. If the government collapsed, you still had gold. Then we invented paper money, bills that represented gold. You could take your paper to the bank and exchange it for actual gold. This was still connected to something real. The paper was just a convenient stand-in. But in 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard. Suddenly, dollars weren't backed by gold anymore. They weren't backed by anything physical. They were backed by a promise, a collective agreement, a mass hallucination that we all participate in. And now most money doesn't even exist as paper, it's just numbers in a database, digital entries, code. When your paycheck gets deposited, physical money doesn't move. Numbers just change in computers. When you buy something with a card, it's not a transfer of anything tangible. It's a subtraction in one database and an addition in another. So if money is already mostly fictional numbers in computers, why not go full digital? Why cling to these 7.5-cent pieces of cotton and linen? Here's why: because those pieces of paper are the last physical anchor to the idea of money. Studies show that people spend more freely with cards than with cash. When you hand over physical bills, your brain processes it as loss. You feel it. But swiping a card, tapping your phone, that feels abstract, painless, not real. This is why credit card companies love digital payments. This is why casinos use chips instead of cash. This is why mobile games use gems and coins instead of showing dollar amounts. The more abstract money becomes, the easier it is to spend. And here's something nobody talks about. How do you teach children about money in a fully digital world? You can give a kid a dollar bill and say, "This is money, keep it safe, don't lose it." They can hold it, see it, understand it's limited. But how do you teach that same lesson when money is invisible, when it's just numbers on a screen that change, when transactions happen with a finger tap? Financial literacy is already terrible. Only 57% of American adults are financially literate. And that's in a world where physical money still exists to make the concept tangible. What happens when money becomes completely abstract for an entire generation? Maybe nothing. Maybe they'll adapt better than we expect. Or maybe we'll create a generation that doesn't understand the value of money because they never experienced it as something finite and physical. So here we are, back where we started, with that simple question: how much does it cost to produce a dollar bill? And now you know the answer is complicated. The direct cost, 7.5 cents. The total cost, including infrastructure, about 8.6 cents. The annual cost to maintain the entire currency production system, $1.2 billion. But the real cost, that depends on what we value. If we only value efficiency, physical currency is expensive and outdated. We should go fully digital tomorrow. If we value resilience, privacy, and inclusion, physical currency is essential infrastructure worth maintaining at almost any cost. If we value tradition and psychological stability, physical money provides an anchor in an increasingly abstract financial system. Here's what's probably going to happen. Over the next 20 years, cash usage will continue to decline, but it won't disappear. The government will reduce production volume, maybe close one of the 2 printing facilities, scale down the operation. But they won't eliminate it entirely, because the moment you eliminate physical currency entirely, you've made a choice you can't undo. And what if we need it again? What if there's a massive cyber attack? What if digital systems fail? What if we discover that a cashless society creates problems we didn't anticipate? You can't just spin up currency production overnight. Those master engravers, it takes years to train them. Those specialized presses, they're custom built. That secure paper, there's only one company that makes it. We're going to keep producing physical currency for the same reason we keep strategic petroleum reserves, maintain redundant communication systems, and stockpile emergency supplies. Not because we use them every day, but because some capabilities, once lost, are too valuable and too difficult to rebuild. So that dollar bill in your wallet, it might become increasingly rare. It might eventually be a collector's item, or it might remain a mundane part of daily life for decades to come. But one thing is certain, it represents something bigger than its 7.5-cent production cost. It represents trust, security, freedom, backup plans, and the physical manifestation of an abstract concept that runs our entire civilization. For 5,000 years, humans have been creating physical representations of value: clay tablets, metal coins, paper bills. Each generation thinks theirs will be the last. Maybe they're finally right. Maybe we're witnessing the end of physical money. Or maybe 100 years from now, people will still be carrying pieces of cotton and linen in their pockets, still trusting that these elaborate pieces of art are worth what they say they're worth. Because printed on every dollar bill are three words that explain the whole system: in God we trust. But really, it should say, in each other we trust. That's what money has always been: a shared belief, a collective agreement, a system that only works because we all decide it works. And maintaining that trust, that costs a lot more than 7.5 cents. So here's what I want to know from you. If you had to choose right now, and you really had to choose, would you vote to keep physical cash or go completely digital? Not what you think will happen, not what you think is inevitable. What would you choose? Drop your answer in the comments, cash or cashless, and tell me why in one sentence. Because this decision will shape the next 100 years of human civilization. And nobody's really asking for your opinion. So I am cash or cashless? Comment below.